Hello everybody, my name's David Hillson. I'm known as the Risk Doctor. I'm something of a thought leader in risk management and also an expert practitioner, which means that I'm interested in both ideas but also making sure that they work. And I've been involved in the world of projects for many years and risk management for 35 years, so a particular interest in managing risk in projects. And a challenge that I'm seeing more and more these days is how to manage risk in complex projects. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So more and more projects are being launched that we might call complex. And if you've ever been asked to work on one of these, or particularly to lead it, you might have in your mind that it's something of a mission impossible. You're kind of doomed to failure because complex projects are always different and difficult. And why is it that we see them as mission impossible? It's because projects are getting increasingly large in however you're measuring that. They're becoming wicked projects which don't have simple solutions, and we're finding that the pace of change is accelerating, so our projects are more and more volatile. So we have this challenge of the mission impossible complex project, and of course hopefully that phrase will make you think of, if not the old television series of the 1960s and 70s, you're not as old as me, but maybe you'll think about the film series. And in that film series you'll notice a number of common factors that have been developed in order to solve those complex, nitty, wicked problems that the team are faced with. And a number of characteristics of the Mission Impossible solution that they've developed in the film include these. Heroic effort from a superstar professional who always just seems to have the skills and the energy that are needed. He's supported by a great team and a great technical support. He's got huge amounts of money. In fact, for the 8 films, if we include Mission Impossible 8 coming out next year, the total production cost for Mission Impossible films is $1.4 billion US dollars. You might balance that with the fact that they've taken over 4 billion at the box office, but it's still huge budget and amazing special effects. And the thing that makes the real difference in whether or not the heroic superstar professional with his great team and tech support manages to come out unscathed and achieve his goals is really improbable good luck. Now, if you're asked to lead a complex project, maybe these things sound familiar, that people see you as the superstar professional who's going to make all the difference. Could risk management possibly help us to manage these mission impossible complex projects? Well, it won't surprise you to learn that I think it can. And I'd like to share with you some practical ideas for how we might make that happen. So there are 3 key questions that we need to ask and answer. And the first is whether complex projects are different from any other project. And you'll see on the screen a model framework which is produced by Dave Snowden. It's called the Cynefin framework. That's a Welsh word which means environment or context or setting. And he's come up with 5 different types of environment, situations that we might find ourselves in, not just in the world of projects, but he calls those clear and complicated, complex, chaotic, and confused. And if your project is clear and you know what your objectives are, then it's fairly simple to just apply best practices and make sure that your project succeeds. If your project environment or situation is chaotic or even confused, you probably shouldn't start the project. So the projects that are interesting, of course, are the ones that are complicated and complex. But what's the difference between those 2 types of project? Complex projects are inherently ambiguous and unpredictable. And I use these 2 images to help us illustrate the difference between complicated and complex. We might look at the Latin roots of these words, which help us understand where they come from, but we won't do that today. But the root of the word complicated means folded, has many folds. And you'll see this origami model here, where you can build this model from a single sheet of paper just by folding it many different ways in a particular pattern. And if you wanted to, you could unfold the piece of paper and get another flat piece of paper and then refold it using the same folds in the same order in the same way and get the same outcome. And complicated situations and complicated projects are like that. You can still apply standard approaches. It might mean there's a lot of them and a lot of different steps, but if you always do them in the same order, you'll always get the same outcome. Complex is different. So we have here a picture of a bowl of spaghetti, and you'll know that it's impossible to pull out one strand of spaghetti and then put it back into the bowl. Once it's out, everything changes. As soon as you pull something, things move within the bowl, and you're never quite sure how things are going to move. How are things connected? How are they related? There's ambiguity and unpredictability in the bowl. So spaghetti represents complex, and actually the Latin root of the word means knotted or tied together. So complex projects are inherently built-in, ambiguous and unpredictable, and we can't apply standard approaches to manage them. So yes, complex projects are different. Which leads us to a second question. If complex projects are different, are they subject to different types of risks? Are there special risks that we find in complex projects? Well, complex projects are, of course, projects, so they do have the typical standard risks that we find that affect all of our projects. But because of the ambiguity and unpredictability that's built into them, there are things that come up that we're completely blindsided, we never saw coming. And we tend to call these, well, emergent risks, or the more popular name would be the black swan. A black swan is something which you've never thought of, you couldn't imagine until you see it. And that's what tends to happen in our complex projects. We're going along quite happily, and then suddenly something emerges out of the mix of our project, and we go, well, where did that come from? And those emergent risks are a feature of ambiguous and unpredictable complex projects. So yes, it's true that although complex projects have the standard typical risks that all projects have, they're also subject to these emergent risks which appear apparently from nowhere. Which leads to a third key question. If complex projects have not only typical risks but also emergent risks, can we manage the risk in a complex project? And of course, the answer is yes. How do we do that? We can use traditional risk management to tackle those typical risks, but we need a different approach for emergent risks. And there's a technique I'd like to introduce you to called futures thinking, which helps us see emergent risks and prepare ourselves for them, even if they apparently appear out of nowhere. So futures thinking is a technique that was developed by the UK government and others. It's a way of scenario planning, of thinking about the future in order to imagine things that might or might not happen. And so it's ideal, of course, for thinking about risks. There's a standard process. You could find it online. It's quite well known and well documented. But it starts by defining what kind of future we're really looking for. What is our preferred future? And this is basic objective setting, which is something that, of course, we're very used to in the world of projects. Once we've got our preferred future, or maybe more than one future defined, we then use a broad set of techniques to consider what futures are possible, what options are there out there that might possibly happen. And then out of those all possible futures, which ones are most likely, which are the probable futures? And then what we try and do is manage the future before it happens so that our preferred future becomes more probable, or maybe even most probable. And as I said, there's a range of good techniques, well-defined techniques, good support for them with methodologies and tools and so on to identify possible futures using some of these things that are on the screen: scenario planning, visualization, and so on. And if you prefer a picture to help you see what this process might look like, it starts with defining our preferred futures. We then imagine the full field of all possible futures, including things that are really crazy and out there and very unlikely. We then analyze that field of possible futures to work out which ones are most likely, most probable. And then we try and manage the future so that if our preferred future isn't already amongst the most probable, we make sure we improve its probability. It becomes one of the most probable futures, or maybe even the most probable future. And that's what managing the future is about. Futures thinking helps us imagine this full set and then think about what we need to do to get our preferred future to actually happen. So how do you manage the future? Surely the future is just out there and it's fixed. Here's a cartoon that says, if only I had some future viewing apparatus at my disposal. Curse my puny brain, I can't think of everything. Do you know what? That's funny, but we actually do have a well applied, well defined technique for imagining and scanning the future. It's called risk management. Risk management is a forward-looking radar that scans the future and says, what's out there? What's coming in my direction? How big is it? How bad is it? Or how good is it? And how fast is it moving? And where am I positioned in relation to those futures, the things that might happen? So we can use the risk management radar to scan ahead and see what futures are possible, and then use risk analysis to analyze those options to find the ones that are most probable. And then it provides us with techniques to manage the future and change what might happen by taking proactive decisions today. So risk management is an ideal technique to apply in the context of futures thinking and futures management. So let's just think a little bit more about this managing the future proactively. Let's try and visualize that. If you imagine you're here now and you think about the things that could happen in future, and you've used one of these techniques perhaps to define it, there'll be things that are good, things that are wonderful, things that are disastrous or not so good, or maybe things that we can't quite imagine, which are unknown. There's a whole range of different possible futures out there which could happen at different probabilities and different times. And we're not quite sure as we stand here now which of those is actually going to happen to us. So what we can do is apply risk management to affect some of these futures once we know what they are. So imagine we move forward in this picture from that time now to this time now, and in between we do some proactive risk management. And what we can do as a result of that is to change the futures that we previously identified. We'll try and take actions that make the good ones better, or that make the excellent ones more likely, or that take the crisis and makes it impossible and the bad one can't happen. And of course, in doing the actions that we decide to do, we might accidentally rule out some futures that could be quite good, and we might leave some not very good futures untouched. But what we're trying to do is, by taking proactive actions now, we're changing what could happen in the future from what it used to be. Of course, when we take proactive action now to change the future, we might also introduce other futures that weren't possible before because of the actions that we've now taken. And some of those could be very good, and some of those could be excellent, and some of them could be disastrous, and some of them surely will be unknown. So risk management is a repetitive process as we go step by step into the future, looking ahead to see what's coming, taking decisions to change the future before we get there, and trying to make sure that the things we want are the most likely things to happen, which of course is the purpose of the futures thinking process. So we're applying risk management into futures thinking. Now, once we're doing that, how do we manage the future through risk management? We said earlier on that complex projects are subject to the normal typical risks which affect all projects, things to do with resources and requirements and stakeholders and all of those standard things. And of course, we can apply traditional risk management processes like the ones you see on the screen, and we can apply standard risk response strategies to manage the typical risks in our complex project, which are the same as typical risks in any other sort of project. So we've got bad risks and good risks, risks with downside effects that could hurt us, threats, and risks with upside effects that could help us, opportunities. And we have the standard kinds of response strategies available to us. And we could apply those in our complex projects as well. But these standard risk response strategies are no good for emergent risks, because you can't see emergent risks coming until they happen. They arrive fully formed in front of you, and there isn't time to be proactive. So we need a different approach for dealing with the emergent risks in complex projects. So how could we do that? I'd like to suggest to you a new approach, a new way of thinking about managing emergent risks, which I think you'll find helpful and interesting. We call it project continuity management. Now, you might have noticed in the earlier slide where we talked about the Cynefin framework that it used a phrase to describe the sorts of techniques we can use to manage risks in complex projects. It talked about adaptive processes. And sometimes in the Cynefin framework, you'll find the word exaptive, which is a word that's like adaptive, but what you're saying is you take an existing technique and you modify it and apply it in a new setting. So it's something that we're familiar with, but we're using it in an unfamiliar way. And project continuity management is like that. The name, as you might suggest, might make you think of business continuity management. And business continuity management, or BCM, is an established discipline, a well-defined set of tools and techniques and approaches to help you preserve and maintain the capability of your organization to keep functioning whatever happens. Using advanced planning to prepare your organization in advance to be able to maintain or rapidly recover business functions in the face of some kinds of challenges, whatever they may be, that lie outside of your normal business parameters, emergent factors, in fact. But what we don't usually see is how to apply BCM, business continuity management, in the project context. So project continuity management borrows from business continuity management and uses those techniques in a project setting to build resilience within the project in such a way that it retains flexibility to respond appropriately to anything, any challenge that may emerge in the future, any emergent risk. So we're looking for resilience that is flexible. And those two things don't often come together. So let me suggest to you that project continuity management involves two key risk response strategies. The first of these is flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking, being flexible, to adapt easily and quickly. And there's a proverb that says the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. The oak that resists might be robust and strong, but eventually when the wind is strong enough, it will bend and break and fall over and drop. Whereas bamboo just bends, and then when the wind goes, it stands up again. That kind of flexibility is what we're looking for in project continuity management. And the other is basic resilience, the capacity to keep going. I call it COCO, keep on keeping on. Some people call it bounce back ability, or what might be more interesting, not just bouncing back to our existing core purpose and integrity, and not just regaining our original shape, but maybe moving forward to something even better, something which takes advantage of the changed situation that's emerged. So what we're looking for is the ability to keep going no matter what we face, and maybe even improve in the face of the emergent challenge. And if we put flexibility and resilience together in the context of projects, that creates what I call adaptive resilience. And I'd like to offer you just a few sort of headline thoughts on how you might practically develop adaptive resilience or project continuity management within your project. Any kind of resilience in projects starts with the people. We need resilient people on our projects if we're going to have resilient projects. And there's a number of characteristics of the resilient person, the sort of person you want working on your complex project. People who have emotional literacy skills or emotional intelligence, but not just emotional intelligence, but a blend of emotional, cognitive, and social intelligence that we call cognitive readiness. Cognitive readiness is a mindset that's really prized in people like fighter pilots or firefighters, emergency responders. And it's a way of thinking that says you're flexible enough to cope with anything that comes up in front of you. And the way you do that is by taking something you're familiar with and modifying it in order to work for what you're confronted with. And that's exactly what we're looking for in this kind of adaptive resilience. We also need effective leaders and an empowered team so that people can do what needs to be done to get the job done, no matter what's happening around them. So resilient people are a foundation for resilient projects. And with these kinds of skills, then we'll develop that adaptive resilience through our people. And the project itself needs some characteristics too, to make sure it's both flexible and resilient. Clear objectives. What are we actually aiming for? We need to know, and we need to reinforce them and keep telling people what is the main target. What's the point? We need to keep the main thing throughout our complex project as risks emerge around us and things change. We need to have processes that can be flexible to respond to different situations. Not we have to do this, then this, then this, but maybe we can do these two things in parallel. Maybe we can leave that until later or do it partially. We need a strong change management process so that we can manage the things that happen and we don't lose track of what's going on, with an appropriate risk budget and contingency, an amount of money and time and resources which is there to be used when things change, and we know the rules for using them and how much we can use. And also a learning project environment, learning lessons for the future to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes twice and we don't miss the same opportunities twice, learning from similar past experience to help us manage the future. So the people and the project together need to have that kind of flexibility and resilience built in. There's also some things in the technical solution and in the contractual area, like having the use of adaptive development and design redundancy. And these things will depend on the details of your complex project, and different types of complex project will have different types of technical flexibilities and technical resilience available to them. And the same with contractual terms and conditions. The things that are boilerplate, not so helpful, things that are specific that we can modify in the light of a changed situation, with clear accountabilities set out in our contract or our business case or our work program. So that's really helpful to make sure we can flex and be resilient without losing track and just going into chaos. And finally, the context within which our project is operating is really important. We need a resilient organization or business within which to conduct our project, which has a strong shared corporate culture and values. Everybody knows what that culture is, what's important, what we will do and won't do, where the lines are and the thresholds, with strong stakeholder engagement. So we can ask key people what they think if things emerge and begin to change without having any kind of threat or blame game. We're all in this together. We want our project to succeed. And these sorts of things, you can see how they can be built into our project context, and the way we set up the project and run the project will make sure that we maintain flexibility and build resilience in an adaptive way. Project continuity management has these kinds of characteristics, and hopefully you'll see these are not too difficult to achieve. Well, let me wrap up with a couple of pictures and slogans, if you like, or headlines, and then we'll make some final thoughts before we finish. Often when things emerge, it seems like there's nothing we can do to control the future. The future will happen, it's just going to happen to us. We're victims of circumstance, and we just have to kind of survive the best we can. Well, we may not be able to control the tides, but we can build better boats. Make sure we're strong enough and flexible enough, whatever comes our way, to float on the surface and at least survive, if not thrive. But there's a different way of thinking about this. Maybe we might think about it like a surfer with these wonderful, massive waves that to some are going to look really threatening. And you go, well, how are we going to deal with that? If you can't control the waves, maybe you should learn to surf and have some fun whilst we're dealing with and engaging with the emergent future. So there are some ways of thinking about this that might just change our approach as we look at this kind of emergent uncertainty ahead of us. So here are some final thoughts just to wrap up with, and I hope what I've said so far has been useful and interesting. Let me ask you a question based on these two pictures. Which of these images best describes the project you're currently on? For many people, it's the left-hand image of a straight railway line. And there are things in our project that we can associate with a railway line and a railway journey. You might think that the line represents our project plan. It starts in a particular place, it ends in a particular place when all our objectives are achieved. There are stations along the way which represent our milestones. There's a timetable which tells you when you're going to arrive at the different stations and the milestones. And there's a ticket price. You buy your ticket, you get on the train, you run along the line, and you get to where you want to go. Is your project like that? Some are, but maybe you're not lucky to be on one of those. Complex projects are never like that. Complex projects are like the picture on the right, a boat that sets sail in stormy waters. And you might have a very clear idea of where you want to get to on the other side of the water. And you could take a map and draw a straight line from here to there, but actually the reality is always very different. As soon as you set sail, the wind blows and the tide comes and the waves are there and somebody else sails in front of you and you need to change direction. You need to be tacking left and right, always keeping an eye on where you're trying to get to and making sure that no matter what happens, you end up there eventually. And for most people, it's the boat on the stormy waters that represents their project, especially if they're leading with or involved in a complex project. And that's why we might think of our projects, our complex projects, as a mission impossible. But it's not impossible to manage a complex project if we can manage the risk, using a combination of futures thinking to work out what could happen and where we might go, and adaptive resilience to make us really ready for anything that might show up. It is possible. Futures techniques to identify those optional futures that might occur, risk analysis to work out which of those are most likely, and then changing the future, managing the future proactively using standard risk management techniques. And then being adaptive and resilient and flexible through, yes, traditional risk management to handle the typical risks that we find in our complex projects, like in all projects, but also using project continuity management to make ourselves ready for dealing with any emergent risk that might come our way. So it is possible. And if we do these simple things, we can move from mission impossible to mission accomplished through managing our risk. It's not that difficult. It's challenging, it's fun, it's exciting, but it does require some thought and some preparation. And I hope some of the ideas that I've offered to you in this presentation will find helpful as you apply them on your own real complex project. Well, I hope you found that useful. I'm happy to answer questions that you might have, and my contact details are on the screen. You can feel free to contact me at any time, and hopefully all the risks that you face in your complex projects will be manageable, and hopefully you'll have more opportunities than threats. I wish you success. Thank you for your time.